Thank you everyone. I'm going to talk today about something I actually knew quite very little about until fairly recently, so I hope you're patient with me. Yeah, as your name, sorry, see, I need to think of a memory trick. Like I said, my name's Steve. I live on the Gold Coast, but I work in Brisbane most days, which is the unfortunate situation we have on the coast. We have the nomads that go to Brisbane every day on that train. It's about 30,000 of us apparently. And my day job is doing Groovy, mainly Groovy and Grails on the Java platform, but I'm also a very unfocused polyglot who just goes and runs around like a headless chicken looking at all sorts of things. So in researching this talk, I was just looking at the history of queuing last night and in a book that I was reading, and I didn't actually realise, but I am actually part of the history of queuing. In about the early 90s, I had a student job at IBM in the UK for a software lab, and I was seconded to the marketing team. It was a pretty boring job, but as a student, you just do what you have to do. And I was crunching through data and doing data mining and decision support systems. And at the time, IBM was going through a downsizing, and they actually downsized our whole lab, about 400 people. There was about 100 students who were basically given away free to other divisions because they'd been budgeted for. And I got seconded to the IBM Global Network in Warwick. Hello, by the way, Jim. Sorry, I saw you there. And they said, do you know any C? And I said, I do actually. I've done a little bit at uni. And they said, right, we're trying to hire a graduate, but you can do it instead. And this thing called MQ Series had just come out, and they had nothing that actually used MQ Series in IBM at all. They had this beta that had come from IBM Hursley, which is just down the road. And they said, well, you can do the logging and alerting. So I ended up trying to decode all these really cryptic logging and alerting frames on MQ Series, and learned a lot about MQ and queuing, and my code ended up being put on a big SP2 supercomputer in the US in the end, and it was a bit of a baptism of fire for me. I did some crazy, stupid things in C, like having pointers to pointers to pointers, and code reviews were pretty funny, and I know, they thought it was pretty funny. But anyway, so I was a part of that, and as I read through the history, I saw, MQ, and I thought, I was there, so that's cool. But ever since, I hadn't actually used a lot of queuing until the last 2 years, and it's sort of come back to it. So my talk today is about RabbitMQ. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not an Erlang programmer in any shape or form at all. I'd quite like to be, and I may have a serious go at it this year, but I know enough to be dangerous, as is often the case with most of the languages I know. Also, I don't know everything. I don't think anyone can claim to that, so just go easy on me. If I don't know anything, I'll probably do the whole politician thing and say I'll refer that to my advisors and get back to you. So, what is RabbitMQ? I thought I'd put some pictures of bunnies in this talk, by the way, because in Queensland it's illegal to have a rabbit as a pet, so you don't actually see many rabbits, and I had rabbits as pets, so I did find someone the other day on the Gold Coast that has an illegal rabbit. He keeps it as a pet that he keeps on his rooftop. And I have a photo evidence of it as well, so I'm going for the blackmail when I get home. So, what is RabbitMQ? Well, RabbitMQ is an implementation of something called AMQP, which I'll get onto on my next slide. It's open source. It's currently NPL, I believe. Mozilla public license. It's written in Erlang. Has anyone here heard of Erlang? Has anyone here programmed in Erlang? I know at least one person does, Stuart, and a few other people. That's good. Excellent. It runs on something called OTP, which is the Open Telecom Platform, which is extremely awesome piece of software, actually. It comes out of telecom, obviously. Extremely robust, great thing to base your software on. It runs on multiple platforms. It's one of its attractions. And it's now actually part of VMware, the core team. So VMware and Spring in particular, the Spring guys are heavily involved with RabbitMQ. So if anyone's used the Cloud Foundry, which is VMware's PaaS offering, you basically get RabbitMQ out the box with that now. So that's all part of their whole infrastructure. And I believe the CloudBees guys are doing something with it as well, based on Michael's tweets today. Is that right, Michael? Yeah, cool. So it's getting a lot of use in the cloud. So what is AMQP? So they've got a pretty boring, crappy logo, to say. First of all, for Java people who are here, it is absolutely not JMS. I'll just repeat that, it's not JMS. It is not JMS. It stands for Advanced Message Queuing Protocol. It's standard, it's just got to 1.0, apparently. And it's what's known as a wire-level protocol. So going back to JMS, JMS is not a wire-level protocol, it was an API, and I think there maybe was some intention initially on having interoperability, but there's no interop. So if you've got MQ series and you've got ActiveMQ or something else like that, there is no way that those things can interop unless you put another broker in the middle and translate, and it's just crazy. So AMQP is a wire-level protocol, and it has many implementations. RabbitMQ is one of them, and it seems to be the one that is the most compliant with the spec, but there are other ones around. So why should you really care about queuing and all this stuff? Well, RabbitMQ is extremely fast. It's got some pretty wicked numbers, actually, on what they're pushing through this thing. As I said before, OTP means it's very, very robust. There's many APIs for all different languages. I'll get onto that a little bit later. But the core team maintain the Java, .NET, and Python and Erlang APIs, but there's also many, many other contributions because it's an open standard. Anyone's welcome to go and write an API for it. It's extremely flexible, so I'll get into that in a minute. Just the way that it is architected means there's massive amounts of flexibility in it. It's very easy to maintain and manage. You don't need to know Erlang at all. Some of the config screens, the dumps have a sort of an Erlang feel to them, just the way the data is represented, but you really don't need to know anything about Erlang unless you want to start hacking around with it and patching it and writing modules and things like that. It has a really great docs and nice community, and I can't emphasize this enough. It's one of the things, personally, I really like. When I find a good open source project with a great community and a mailing list that people don't flame people every second, and they look after you. This is one of the reasons I'm actually a Groovy programmer. The Groovy community is a really nice community, very welcoming, and I have been in other communities, but I've settled on that one. And the Erlang community, the RabbitMQ and the Erlang community actually seem to have that similar kind of feel to it. So I like it. I get a nice warm feeling about that. Documentation, superb. Awesome job. So I'll show you the website later, maybe. This is probably the most complicated slide in my talk. Just a little bit on the anatomy of what RabbitMQ is. So RabbitMQ has this thing called a virtual host, which is basically the container for a RabbitMQ instance. And this is basically, virtual hosts don't have, if you have multiple virtual hosts, they are completely segregated. They don't, that's basically where all your users and permissions are set up. And creating a virtual host is pretty much the only thing you have to do via the admin console. Once you've got a vhost, the rest of it can be done via APIs. But to create your initial vhost, you have to use the admin utilities. Within that, a big part of RabbitMQ is the exchange, and there's different types of exchanges, which I'll get onto in a minute. Down the bottom here we have queues, and they're bound to exchanges via bindings. Queues are a little bit different to the way they're used traditionally in MQ series or in the JMS world, which I'll get onto in a minute. Everyone following me so far, by the way? Cool. And I forgot to do my build, so here we go. Vhost exchanges, there's direct fan topic. Headers is there, but don't use it, it's legacy. Bindings, everything is bound via something called a routing key. You see these little routing keys here, which I'll get onto. And keys can be a variety of different types, named and anonymous. I'll get onto why you would use an anonymous queue in a minute. They can be durable. By default, they are not durable, so they won't withstand a reboot. But you can add durability and things like auto-delete and exclusive, things like that. A lot of these things come with trade-offs. So, for instance, durability, you trade off a bit on performance. If you persist things to disk as opposed to keeping them in memory, then again you trade off in performance and potentially also cause yourself some problems with clustering. This is the simplest exchange, called the direct exchange. And basically with the direct exchange, this routing key that you set here basically maps to a queue down here. Sorry. So you've got a cucumber with a routing key cucumber, it basically goes to this green queue here. So that's the simple standard system. So that's routing key testing. Depending on how you set up the queues down here, it'll work as a standard worker queue or as a pub sub. So I mentioned before about anonymous queues and creating queues. You can, because this whole thing is done via routing keys and exchanges, you can basically create your own local queues and anonymous queues prior to that. You can make that binding and then immediately you've got pub sub. So there's no, like in JMS, there's the whole queue and topic thing is quite separate. It's all sort of a bit more merged in here. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. The next exchange is a fan-out exchange. Basically, doesn't care about routing keys at all. It'll just basically send to every queue within the exchange, useful for logging and things like that. But a lot of what happens with fan-out you can actually do with direct, so I haven't used this as much. The final one is the topic exchange. And again, you can do a lot of what topic exchanges do with direct exchanges, because you can actually bind multiple times to queues and get a similar sort of level. But with topic exchanges, the routing queues, you can use wildcards, and they generally use the dot to separate the different parts of the routing key. And you can use stars to bind to partial routing keys. So you can get quite a bit of power here. You see there's a log critical and alert.critical, and that queue there is bound on all logs. It goes to that there. That's accepting all criticals, and this is doing all the alerts, so you get the message. Both messages on this queue, but these separately. So this is a very simple example, but you can come up with quite complicated, interesting scenarios. You can do the hash as well, which gets everything, which basically gives you then effectively like a fan-out. Payloads. AMQP doesn't really care about payloads at all, so it doesn't really get involved like a lot of messaging systems. But a lot of people use JSON, and there are some plugins into AMQP that allow you to do automatic things with JSON. So most of the examples in the books will use JSON. If you really want to, you can use XML. I don't, but some people like it still. Protocol buffers seems to be a really common one that people use. Has anyone used it with protocol buffers? Yeah. So that seems to be quite common. I haven't done a lot of protocol buffer for a while actually, but I'm thinking I might get back into it as a result of this. You can also just do standard serialized objects if you know that both ends are speaking the same thing. You could use, if you're using Python, you can pick all the objects and send them, or Java serializable stuff, just stick it on the wire and then grab it at the other end. Administration. The standard one that people use is called RabbitMQ CTL, which comes with Rabbit, and it's a fairly basic command line tool. You get output like this. As I was saying before, that's kind of the Erlang data structure. So there you see. But there's a variety of other commands, such as scroll this up, adding vhost, stop starting. When you get into clustering, you'll use this stop start to add nodes into the cluster and things like that. Adding vhost, deleting vhost, setting permissions. But I'll show you in a minute. There's a kind of a better way to do this. But if you're hardcore and you love command line, then you can do that. So there's a web interface, which I've just took a little screen capture of here, and I'll show you a more detailed example of it later. But it's quite a nicely written web interface. It's again written in Erlang, and it uses what's the name of the thing it uses? Can't think of it. It uses an Erlang framework for all the web stuff. Web Machine, that's it. Yeah, it uses Web Machine. It's a really nice admin interface, probably one of the best I've used. I think it's just very well thought out. The UI and the usability of it is great. There's a thing called RabbitMQ admin, which basically is another command line tool that sits over the REST interface. So is the next. Sorry, I'll go back. Yeah, so that sits over the REST interface, and that allows a command line interface to that. And the REST interface is massive as well. You can pretty much do everything via that. They have in the newest version, they have a nice little RabbitMQ plugins command line thing for managing your plugins as well. Plugins were a little bit clunky before. You had to copy them into the right place and make sure you didn't have different conflicting versions and things. So that's made things nice. It's a little bit of a sort of it's a bit like the Apache A2N command, for enabling and disabling virtual hosts, that sort of thing. APIs, I quickly mentioned that before. We've got Java, .NET, Python, Erlang from the core team, but there's also Ruby, PHP, Perl, there's a C one, because it's a standard, a lot of them are just AMQP libraries. There are a few little specific RabbitMQ things, but generally they're all just AMQP compliant. Most of the book that I'll get onto a little bit later, most of the examples are done in Python and PHP. There's actually no Erlang examples in the book at all, or very little. So Python one seems pretty good. The main one the books use is one called Pika, P-I-K-A, which is, but then there's a new one called Puka, P-U-K-A, which is a little bit more convention-based. You don't have to do so much boilerplate at the start, but I haven't actually done any of my stuff in Puka yet, because most of the people still know Pika 1, and I'll just stick with that until it gets a bit more mainstream. There's another thing called Stomp. Has anyone heard of Stomp? Yeah, so Stomp, there's a plugin for RabbitMQ to Stomp, and Stomp is a sort of, how would you describe it? It's a text frame-based protocol. You can telnet into it and just go connect, subscribe, all that sort of stuff. You can demo it in a telnet session quite easily. And there are plugins for that, and there are also APIs for Stomp in a lot of languages. I think the Ruby guys tend to use Stomp quite a bit. So that interoperates pretty well with Rabbit. The older versions had some problems, but the new one seems pretty good. There's also XMPP plugins for doing chat, because messaging is a common thing. Chat is a common thing that these systems are used for, so you can plug into your Google Talk type stuff. And there's the RESTful interface, which I can just quickly show you. This is an example of how good the Docker is actually. If you go to just 5, just to the normal port there. Is it running? This is the management interface. I think it's API. It's not going to let me have it. Anyway, the full RESTful API, if you just hit the URL, you get the whole API described for you, and there's also little test fixtures to be able to test all the various things built into it. So that's quite nice. Don't quite know what I did there. Never mind. Oh, there's one of the RESTful things. I think you got API like that. There you go, this is it. So the Docker is built into the actual thing there and gives you all the examples of using curl, how to hit the API, and then you've got a reference of all the various methods and which of these endpoints it applies to. So that's quite neat. You can easily knock things up if you don't want to bother with any libraries at all, and you just want to hit it with HTTP. You can do pretty much everything via that API. Does anyone use that one? Do people use that? Yeah. Okay, so I'll just close that. Where was that? Okay, so I talked about RESTful. I've got a little demo here. This is my new visualization graphics tool I've been using lately, which is writing on the back of a program this morning at the breakfast table. I've got a little demo. It's pretty lame actually, but that's all the demos are. They're generally lame. Glenn will rest to that. He had several lame demos yesterday, didn't you, mate? So I've got a little Grails app at the left-hand side here on the top left. And I like taking pictures of bunnies, to see illegal bunnies on the Gold Coast. And so I've been looking around for illegal bunnies, and I'm going to shock all these people with rabbits. And I'm going to upload those into the my bunny app. And there's going to be a bit of processing that happens on the back end. At the moment, I'm just doing thumbnailing, but then there's going to be rabbit facial recognition built into it. With tagging, ID tagging, and all sorts of things, and it's all going to be sent to Queensland Police, all in the cloud, of course. I did have a really nice React database in here, and I was doing MapReduce on the bunny identities, but I threw that away and just put MySQL in that at the moment because I'm not actually doing a talk on React, so it's just got a standard MySQL database, and then that's pushed back to the application. I just made that up on the fly about the bunnies, and I'm quite proud of myself.
Is there a black marquee as well?
Yeah, so this is the thing, we can add all this very easily. So this is my little Grails app. I don't know if anyone here uses Grails. If you don't, check it out. The author of Grails in Action is right sitting at the back there on the left-hand side, if you want to ask anything about it. He's not putting his hand up, that's right. Yeah, so I've got a little app here, and I can upload my photos. And this guy, I saw him down in Churn Park the other day. He was not on a leash as well. So I can update that. And that submitted that into RabbitMQ. I can go and look in the management interface and see so I'm just doing this on the fly here. Okay, you can see there I've got one message queued, and you can see all the details. You can actually go in the management interface and pull the thing off the queue. It'll immediately push it back onto the queue again as well. You can't actually browse things on the queue because it breaks the model. So I can actually go and do that. I've got some connections here. I've got one client which is connected in there. I didn't mention this before, but AMQP uses the concept of channels. So basically just save on TCP connections and get the performance that it needs. You basically create a channel. I think most other message queuing systems use a similar concept. I know IBM does with MQ. You create an MQ channel and push everything through there, and that's how they scale. By sharing all those connections on one point. So that's the channel, and I have an exchange here called image.process here. It's just a direct exchange. And these parameters here tell you what sort of, you can have all sorts of parameters on your exchange. For instance, where is it? Type. Can't actually edit them here. There's different things you can add, such as whether they're durable. That D there means it's a durable exchange, which will exchange it will survive a reboot. So what was I doing? Yes, so I uploaded a bunny there, and I've got one bunny there just sitting in the system. That's from before, actually, because the system's not running at the moment. There's nothing there at the moment. So if I go and start up my little processor, which is going to do the processing of all these illegal bunnies, start that one up. And he's already started processing one that I submitted, and just for the hell of it, I'll start another one as well. And just for the hell of it, I'll start another one. So I'm sort of load balancing basically off that same queue there. And over in my app, because I'm lazy, I don't want to hit the web interface. I'll just start up a little functional test here. I've got just written in web drivers. Don't know if does anyone here use WebDriver, Selenium, all that sort of stuff. So that's just going to hit the web interface and just start throwing bunnies in there like crazy. It's a bit slow to kick off, so I should get a few. Where's my Grails app? Oh, I've already got some bunnies coming through there. That's my Grails app, just sending the things to RabbitMQ. This processor picked up number 2, number 5. This guy picked up 1. Forget the first one there. 1, 4. This is real basic stuff, but it gives you an idea. And I was just going to show you now in the management interface again. You've got should have a few more things happening here. And has anyone read Watership Day? Yes. We've got five up here.
The hazard of working with this is the large number of Watership Down references.
Oh yes, I did originally have a whole Watership Down thing with bunnies going into warrens and the what they call the Luftwaffe, not the Luftwaffe, the Refactor police stopping people. But I canned that demo. It was getting a little bit too much. So yeah, we've got some queues there, some stuff happening. While I just leave that running there, I have, apologies for my flicking around here. I also have another little app I've written here. Oh, sorry, I didn't show you before. The processor is written in Python. And so, before I start, the Grails one basically uses a Grails plugin. So all I have to do in Grails is just go rabbit send. And I've also, I've already JSONified the incoming thing. And I'm just hitting rabbit send. It's just as easy as that. And I have an equivalent one for subscribing to queues and pulling things off queues. On the Python side, I've just got a little bit of code here at the top. So this is what I was saying about before with Pika. There's a bit of boilerplate that you have to do. For instance, making connections, setting up credentials, declaring your channel bindings, declaring a queue, and then giving it a consumer. And then I've just got a little function here that actually does the consuming of the message, pulls the data out, decodes it, puts it in SQL. And this is a key thing I didn't talk about before. There's a thing called this is basically where you get your not quite guaranteed delivery, but your sort of guaranteed delivery. in RabbitMQ, you have to, unless you set your queue to auto ACK, which is really not recommended, you have to acknowledge the message. If you don't acknowledge this message, eventually it will get put back on the queue again. So if your program dies before you can acknowledge, then you've got some gone.
So in that case, my thinking would normally be you'd receive the message and immediately act it. But in fact, what you're doing is only acting it when you can say we have definitely processed and completed all that. So
if you use some of the real high-end messaging systems, like I think IBM MQ has just have a thing called XA, which is like a high-end enterprise thing, which is a distributed transaction system. So you can, if you have a database that's XA compliant and you have a queue system that's XA compliant. I used to do Tuxedo back in 1999. I don't know if anyone's ever used Tuxedo. They sort of started the concept. You have basically a global transaction that spans the queues, databases. You could be sending things off to a mainframe if the mainframe has XA too. And that's basically full guaranteed delivery. You know that when the thing's committed, the transaction, that it's gone everywhere and the database, the queue is empty. With this, it's a sort of poor man's version, but you can make it almost as good there is transactions in RabbitMQ as well, which I'll get onto in a minute.
So how long before the message goes back on? If you've got some delay, long your table execute something. How does it know you can train the process?
Just waiting. I think it's quite a long time. I can't remember the exact time, but you can customize all of that. But yeah, you're right. You could have a way.
Acknowledge it within next seconds.
Yeah, and so you have to be aware of that. You could get yourself in a situation where you're just retrying all the time. It's always timing out. So
or it could be processed twice. Because you could be just locked for a bit, it reroutes it to the queue, but this process you end up having the same thing on twice.
Oh, you mean if the database thing actually timed out but was successful?
Yeah,
potentially. Yeah, so it's not a silver bullet. There are things, as I was going to get to on my next on my final conclusion. There's no silver bullet in all these things. So yeah, you can do the auto ACK as I mentioned before, but even if you do want to auto acknowledge things, they still recommend that you just put an ACK at the start of your code as opposed to using the auto ACK, because it's a bit complicated, but there's a period of time where the acknowledgements can get screwed up. So generally, don't use auto ACK. There's a whole load of other things that you can do with queues. So I've just did a fairly basic example here. So that was the demo there. I also have another little app that I wrote. You really have to excuse my Python here. I'm not a Python developer, so a lot of this is probably not very great Python. This is a little monitoring app that I wrote just to monitor the logs. And this app is slightly different to the other one. With the first one, because we're using the worker model, we all subscribe to the same queue. So basically the thing is load balance. With the monitoring one, I'm using an anonymous queue. And basically, so I can have many of these monitors all getting everything. Don't want to actually load balance this. So in this case, I do, where I see this channel queue declare thing here, I actually get the name of the queue, and I'll show you what that looks like in management in a minute. And I bind that, and I don't actually have any queue names in here at all. It's all just auto-generated. And these are also set, if you just look there, you've got exclusive true and auto-delete true. Basically, when this program finishes, the queue is automatically deleted. And it's exclusive to this process, so people can't go in and mess with your queue. So each one of these monitors has got its own queue that's bound to the... does that make sense? I'll just quickly run that one. There's not a lot of logging happening in the app at the moment. That's just the name of the queues that I was just outputting. So you can see this is the auto-generated queue name. And there's not much happening in the system, so I'll try and create some logs just to show you... so if I go in here and look at my queues, I should see, I think it refreshes every 5 seconds. Oh. Really? Yeah. Oh, I'm on the wrong exchange. Right. These are my queues. You can see there I've got AD on the parameters there. That's the because I did them as auto-delete. So I can go in here into this queue and I can go in and delete the messages, right? I can do that? No, I can't because it's an exclusive queue. And it says it's locked. So I should have a log message there that's popped out in my monitor there. This could be something a lot more fancy. I could write a nice little app that head up console to show me all my messages and send SNMP traps or whatever you want to do, really. So that these logging queues are built into the system, and they all run on the default exchange. So if you go on there, sorry, exchange or something. So there's an exchange there called RabbitMQ.log, which is built into the system, which you can subscribe to various different log messages from that. So that was my quick lame demo. How are we going for time? Pretty good, right? Okay. So hopefully I'll get plenty of time for questions at the end. So that was it. Right, next I was just going to quickly talk about clustering and high availability in RabbitMQ. Because RabbitMQ actually runs on the OTP, basically clustering is completely out of the box. Yeah, so that runs completely out of the box. And basically clustering within RabbitMQ has two goals. One is to try to keep RabbitMQ running when something fails. And the second is to provide linear scaling. So I omitted something there. It doesn't actually guarantee delivery and guarantee any against message loss. So that can be a problem to some people, especially if you come from things like MQ, which that's the whole thing they sell it on, guaranteed delivery. So there are a few things that you can do to get around that, such as transactions, and you can do things, if you're on a single node, you can do things like making your queues durable and persisting them to disk if you need to, things like that. But the moment you get into a clustering scenario, you can't do that because the cluster basically does not keep the queues on all of the nodes in the cluster. The queues are spread out. So if your cluster one of your nodes in your cluster goes down and that happens to have your queue on it, it doesn't. If it's on disk, it doesn't automatically appear on the other nodes in the cluster. It will just sit there until the node comes back up again. So if you're using memory queues, then you're okay. As that node goes down, the queue just gets recreated on one of the other nodes, but you have potentially lost some data. So there are certain applications where this wouldn't be a great idea. But then there's other things where you don't really care, and a lot of web apps don't really care if you lose some data, especially if it's some chat stream or if it's, say, a stop quote. If you lose one of the messages and another one comes a second later, it doesn't matter that something broke along the way. So there's a lot of scenarios where that doesn't actually matter, and the linear scaling and the failure, the thing not failing is more important. So you're happy to sort of make that trade-off. There are other things you can do using active standby. You can have basically what they call a warren, I think it is, which is two nodes, one active and the other one just sitting there ready to take over if the other one fails. And you can also do some crazy stuff with shared disk and things like that, but it's kind of not recommended. Most people have a separate disk for both. There's a plugin called Shovel, which allows you to automatically shovel things from one node to the next, and you can do that over the internet. What I'd neglected to mention before, the clustering, don't run that over the internet. It really needs a good network. So some people have tried to do it on remote nodes, and it's not a great idea. So Shovel is one plugin you can use to automatically push messages across to other vHost nodes. There's another thing called Federation plugin, which is fairly new, which is an extension of Shovel, which allows you to build federated clusters of RabbitMQ nodes that might not necessarily be in the same location, and they can push data around that way. Haven't done a lot with that. I was just going to, if you want to know more about RabbitMQ, there's a great book. It's currently in Meep out of Manning, but it's quite close. It's called RabbitMQ in Action, obviously. And Alvaro in particular has been very helpful. I've sent him a few questions. A really nice book. The system that he uses RabbitMQ for, I think his majority of it's written in PHP. And a lot of the examples in the book are Python. As I said before, it's a little bit of Erlang, but great book. Hopefully it'll be out soon. There's also, if you want to know more about Erlang, there's a conference happening in Brisbane quite soon called the Erlang Factory Light, which is being run by my friend OJ. And that's going to be on the Sunday before Yao conference. Is anyone here attending Yao? Know about Yao? few people. So yeah, on the Sunday before the Brisbane there's this Erlang Factory Light. I think it's like $20 to go to the conference, and they've got like the creator of Erlang. There's John Hughes, some like really big names that are going to be there all day, and OJ explicitly told me to say you don't need to know anything about Erlang, even if you don't want to learn Erlang. There's heaps that can be learnt on that day, so you can check that out. If you really want to go hardcore and learn OTP, they have a 2-day university session at the end of and basically after 2 days, you basically taught by the guy that wrote OTP. You know everything there is to know about OTP. But that's pretty full on. But the Erlang Factory Light looks pretty good. My slides are there if you want them. I think that's all I had. I did have one of the slides which I've forgotten about, but I'll just open it for questions. I'll attempt to answer questions. I know there's some other RabbitMQ people in the audience that may even know more than me, so they can help me out if I get stuck.
Sure. I just wanted to mention on the clustering HA section, you can set up what are called node queues, which are where they're actually stored on multiple nodes. So if you have a node failure, you don't lose the existing messages that are there without needing to mess around with shared disk or apps.
So do you use Shovel to push those across, or is it something within Rabbit itself? Yeah, cool. Yeah, I haven't tried that yet. The one thing I didn't mention before when I was talking about all the various paradigms, it's not just the 3 exchanges there. By using combinations of other exchanges, you can do RPC as well. You can do, so you don't necessarily have to be in a queued system. You can do a standard remote procedure call by using, there's a reply to field in the message, which allows you to define usually an anonymous local queue to get the reply back. So you can actually do full RPC on it, but still get all the benefits of Rabbit, being able to subscribe to the messages and add new things. Has anyone here used RabbitMQ in a big project? Michael, you want to tell us about it? Or?
Well, I wasn't involved with setting it up, so I'm a consumer of it, and have clients in. Use the clients, one in Python, another Java, one that we use from Scala, and then in Erlang. And my experience as a user has been really good. Like, I don't know in detail how it's set up, but I haven't needed to. I just understand the concept of the routing keys and whether something's pub sub or whether it's point-to-point or RPC is more a convention of how it's used. Like if I do it as a call, I expect one response, or I expect one more responses, or I send and forget. If it's fanning out, from my point of view, that's just the routing key is what I'm matching for. So it's from a user's point of view, if you're not involved in the design of setting it up, it seems to be pretty easy to use. So it's recommended.
It's got packages for Ubuntu, Debian, most distros, and they just seem to all just work out of the box. Cool.
This may be more of a queuing question than a Rabbit question per se, but let's say your image processing thing. Let's say you're doing a search across 1 million photos, and you want PHP form. Person submits a photo, and then they want to get some status back on how that search is progressing. The PHP page is going to open up a queue and start asking for messages. Is it going to see every single message that has been created by the worker from the word go, or does the worker have to say, okay, now I'm simultaneously receiving a request for a status from the PHP page, or is there a...
You could use the RPC mechanism to get the call back, and that might be hooked to some Ajax or something like that to actually tell people it's got back, or the thing could be... it depends whether you're going to put the results. Are they going to be thrown in a database, or are you going to return them directly?
If I
or
wanted to say, search 20 of a million images, 50 of a million images, that sort of stuff. Give a status update on the page, rather than if the worker is emitting a message for every single image that it's compared. When the PHP program, the front end connects, does it then see 19 messages, or does it just see the messages that it's got in the queue? to just see the latest message? Or is there
Depend-
a way to configure that?
Yeah, well, you could use topics that have particular things that you want to see. You might only want to see a wildcard of like a certain status, or there's a million different ways you could. I think.
It's kind of getting at, if you don't have that continuous connection, can you kind of store things in the queue and then you connect, get all of that?
Yeah, well, they'll sit on the queue. Yeah, so
Or if I only want the latest one, if I'm only interested in the latest message in the queue, can I just get that? Or
yeah, well, generally you have to go and get the messages, but you could have some other process that flushes them and throws them away, or there's other things you can do. There's probably some. Michael probably knows the things you can
There
do.
is a way of setting. I don't know how it's set up, but I know there's a bit we use where we publish statistics on things, which is thousands of messages a second or a minute, and they don't bank up. So when you subscribe to that topic, you don't get everything from when it started. If there's no one listening to it, they just get thrown away.
Okay.
And it's only once you tap into it that you start receiving. I can't remember how.
You can do the auto-delete queues, and then you can get it to basically throw away if no one's listening to that.
Basically, you reach the server and you.
So it'll hit the exchange, and no one's actually on there listening for that, so they'll get dumped. And then when the app starts,
That might be what you want.
So in my case, what you probably do is have an auto-delete queue. The PHP client connects, waits for the first message to come, and it's displayed the status, and then maybe a couple of milliseconds, but that's okay. Okay, cool.
There's quite a lot of people using it in conjunction with NoSQL, and they'll basically put that into a NoSQL database or key store. Or like I know in Erlang there's things like React and CatchDB, and there's heaps of other ones as well. So they'll use the two together. If you use Cloud Foundry, which is the VMware PaaS offering, you get RabbitMQ basically already there in the cloud. So I've got a Grails app that's got a RabbitMQ in it, and I start the thing up, I deploy the thing to Cloud Foundry, and Cloud Foundry says, "Oh, I've detected your app needs RabbitMQ. You want us to create a RabbitMQ node," and it creates me one with a random name and injects that back into my app. And then when my app finishes, and that just sits there, I don't actually have to do anything with RabbitMQ, and they've got the same for Redis and MongoDB and all that stuff. They follow the same thing. If your app's using MongoDB, it goes, "Oh, you want a MongoDB too," and you can. So that all this cloud stuff's sort of going that way. You get the PaaS offerings. All of this stuff's just being treated as infrastructure now, and same with MySQL and all that stuff as well. So you just concentrate on your app, and you just utilise this infrastructure, which is being. I guess you don't see whether it's clustered or highly available or whatever. Really, you just use an endpoint and use it. So you guys have got some RabbitMQ in the Cloud Bees offering now, have you? Or,
Well, we just use it ourselves.
Right, okay.
We don't expose it or anything. It's
Yeah.
just the back end.
Mhm.
I guess if people are interested.
Yeah. I don't know how many people are using the Cloud Foundry one, but they have been pushing it a bit lately. It's another cool thing they can add to their. They've also got Gemfire and things like that in their offering, which is the proprietary.
I think it would be a good thing to offer. I enjoyed using it compared to use like the AMQP and other JMS things in the past, and I hated them all.
There's another.
Rabbit was the first thing that, as a consumer of the technology, I didn't need to know too much.
There's another one called ZeroMQ, which some people may be familiar with. And anyone use that? Which, I know Stuart's a big fan. It's a brokerless queuing system, which maybe Stu could do a lightning talk on it something later in the week. But I know that if you Google RabbitMQ, there's quite a few threads about ZeroMQ versus RabbitMQ versus this versus that. RabbitMQ and ZeroMQ seem to have sort of different use cases. There's similarities, but also some differences there. ZeroMQ seems like a bit more of a peer-to-peer type thing. Is that right?
More PHP.
More peer-to-peer.
Oh.
They sort of discover, it's like the sockets are discovered and it finds out who's listening via the, it's brokerless. So, anything else? Does anyone else have any comments or questions?
You mentioned it as on the wire protocol, but obviously it just runs over TCP to transport them.
Mhm.
Then it's encapsulated format underneath.
Yeah, so there's
the AMQP.
yeah. There's a whole standard about that. You can download the spec and write an implementation if you want. Apparently, it is. There are some quirks about it. That's why I think some people have used Stomp instead, because that's like it's very easy Stomp. You just go connect, published. It's not, you don't get access to all the AMQP stuff, but most of the things that you would need are already there, and you can just open a socket and throw some text down at that. But most of the languages I've seen have AMQP APIs. Go doesn't have one. I was talking to Andrew Joanne the other day, but I was going to ask him about it. I think some people have just used the Stomp thing. But it seems pretty good. It's got some good backing. There's some big financial organisations behind AMQP, as they were initially when queuing first, when Tibco came out, like way back. It was a lot of it was pushed by big financial organisations wanting to get stock quotes and pricing and all those sorts of things. But now that there's I can't remember the name of the big bank. That's one of but the AMQP. Probably can't get it here. It's got the list of all the people. Yeah, JP Morgan. That's it. Yeah, it's got the list of the people that are actually on the. I can't remember where it is now. There is a list of them here somewhere. Okay, cool. Yeah, I saw the Red Hat one because the doco's really good. You get some great there's some great diagrams in there. I almost used them in my presentation, but I wasn't sure if they were usable or not. So I used Alvaro's ones in the end, but they were really nicely done.
I actually I wrote the documentation for Merge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still involved in the project. I'm not writing anymore, and the woman who is writing, I actually just sent her a message to say you've got to get the video of this talk because these mentions and everything stuff.
Cool, well done, Max. That's awesome. That is really good. Yeah, I was very impressed. It was actually Alvaro's presentation that he did before he wrote the book. He put the Red Hat ones in there, but I think when he wrote the book, he decided to do his own diagrams. But they're really nice. And I did have them on the whiteboard at work. I was describing it to work. I copied your diagram, and I almost just took a photo of that and put that in my presentation. But
believe me, it took a lot of time to develop that main diagram that we use. I actually drew that for the first time in coloured pencil, sitting on my laundry floor. I scanned it in and sent it to my graphic designer, and my graphic designer and I spent months getting that picture right. So there's a lot of work going into that.
That's awesome. Right, sorry, was there another one? Yeah.
Just to follow up on the standards, is the standard aware of queues, bindings, exchanges? Is that all part of the
it's
protocol?
all part of
so
the
the way an
standard.
exchange talks to a queue via an online
I believe so. Yeah, it's all in there. So RabbitMQ is a very it's very it follows the standard very closely. ActiveMQ are almost there with their implementation. And then there's a few others that are fairly loosely based on the standard. The two I hear about are ActiveMQ and RabbitMQ with regards to the standard, but there's a whole load of others there. But yeah, Rabbit seems to have the... Is anyone aware of any others or used any others? No. We use my main client, we use HornetQ quite a lot. I don't think Hornet has MQP stuff in it at all.
No, it uses...
Yeah. Yeah, Stomp is it? Yeah.
That's one of the ways
Yes.
interoperability.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening for me. Ahead of time. That's the first.
I just wanted to thank you for that. Very exciting. I use ActiveMQ more. I'll try that.
Thank you.
Here's some gifts.
Thank you very much. Cheers.